In this video, I'm going to talk about brand functions. Now, what do I mean when I say brand function? This ties back to the very basic questions of why people will buy brands in the first place and are willing to spend money on them, and why companies, on the other hand, would invest into the development of strong brands. Now, what brand functions mean is that if brands are implemented well, then they have benefits both from a consumer perspective and a company perspective, right? So both parties, the consumer on the one hand and the company on the other hand, stand to gain from the concept of brands. And what I'm going to do now is talk in more detail about how and why customers on the one hand and companies on the other hand benefit from brands. Now let's start talking about the consumer side first. Now, why do consumers care about brands? And I can only talk for myself is the very simple fact that I like brands, right? So assuming I can afford them, I like buying branded products, and the reason is, and I'm not alone, I assume, otherwise, we wouldn't have all these brands in the marketplace, so people like buying brands, and the question is why? Now, of course, there's tons and tons of research on that topic about why people would buy brands or are interested in brands. Now, but if you look at the literature and structure it carefully, it basically comes down to two different functions or two different types of benefits. Now, the first one is something they would call functional benefits. And this means that brands provide some orientation and facilitate information processing. Now, but importantly, they also signal quality and reduce your purchase risk. And because they do that, because they facilitate decision making, and reduce risk, well, in return for that, they will come with a certain price premium. Now, again, I can illustrate that through an example. I assume, at least I hope all of you know the German company Nivea. Now, Nivea does a lot of personal care products, so shower gel, shampoos, all kinds of creams, everything you need in terms of personal care and personal hygiene. Now, I've been using these products for a long time, probably for the last 10 to 20 years, and I'm happy with these products, right? They're not very complicated or very complex products, but I'm happy with them, and I keep buying them. Now, a few years ago, something significant happened in my life, so my wife and me had our first kid. Now, and once that happens, your life changes dramatically, for the better, mostly, of course. No, it does change for the better. But the question is, now in that case, you will need to buy tons and tons of new products that you hadn't considered before, right? So starting with diapers and baby food, but also baby wipes and creams and so forth. So what do you do in that kind of situation when you have no clue? I mean, you've never thought about buying baby wipes beforehand, so what do? Now, what I did, I go into the supermarket and a drugstore and I start looking around, and what do I see? I see an entire section of Nivea products devoted to baby care. So there's a brand that I know from beforehand, from my previous life, deodorants, shampoo, shower gel, and so forth, and I'm happy with that. And now I see they offer product in a new category which I need at this very moment. And what do? Well, because I'm happy with their shower gel and deodorants, well, maybe I will try out their baby wipes as well. So I transfer trust from one category to another category, and this facilitates my information processing because I don't have to think about it again, on the one hand, and also reduces my risk because I know I can trust the Nivea brand. Now, in return for that, Nivea would say, yes, we can do all that for you. Now, but in return, we will charge you a price premium of 10 to 20%. And I'm happy to pay that. So brands, people buying brands, so it can make perfect sense to buy brands because they will reduce your purchase risk. And this is what they call the functional benefits. Now, at least as important, but probably more important when we talk about brands, is something that we call emotional benefits. Now, this is tied to the idea that brands provide some kind of attractive emotional experience. Now, and very important that brands allow consumers to build and exhibit themselves. So what do I mean when I say people can build themselves through brands? Now, and this is possible. What I mean is that brands are carriers of a certain symbolic meaning, and that we use a symbolic meaning to express who we are. So let's assume you would be wearing or buying a pair of Adidas sneakers. Now in that case, and you would try to communicate something else to the world So what you would communicate to the world would be something different than had you bought a pair of Gucci sneakers, right? Because the brands stand for two very different ideas, Gucci on the one hand, Adidas on the other hand, and you buying and using these brands, now in that case you communicate something to the world. Now they call that a process of identity construction. Now let's look at that process in a bit more detail, because it's important to understand why people are so attracted to brands. Now this ties back to the very basic idea of identity. Now, what is identity? Now, this depends on how you look at it. Now, I think about 100 years ago, when researchers in psychology would start thinking about identity, now they would believe that identity is like some kind of gene that's inside you, or some kind of organ, so to speak, right? Now that the identity is inside you, it's relatively fixed. Now it may be difficult to express it and bring it out, but that it's at least there in some kind of objective sense. Now, a couple of decades later, I think starting in the 1960s or 70s, now people would say, well, that idea about identity, about who people are, now that's not true, right? That's not the case that people just have one identity. Now they have many different identities. And not only that, now people can choose to a certain degree what their identity is, like they can choose to a certain degree what kind of person they want to be. Now, see, so my identity on the one hand, I'm a marketing professor, that's an important part of my identity, and I'm also a father, that's another important part of my identity. Now, but let's assume this is not enough for me. Now let's assume, and I think, you wouldn't guess it when looking at me, but let's assume I want to be some kind of outdoorsy person. I'm going to say, well, this whole marketing and father thing is not enough for me. There needs to be something else. I want to be some kind of rugged adventurer, a mountaineer, whatever. Now, how do I become an adventurer and an outdoorsy person? Now, and they say, how they say that identity, who you are, is manifested through your actions. So what you do determines who you are. Now, what I could start doing would go climbing and skiing in the weekends, for instance. Now, I could get rid of my car, so if I'm in the mountains and nature all the time, I don't need a car. Now, also, I could go MacGyver style, so to speak, and learn how to survive with my pocket knife, right? Now, these are just vague ideas about what I could do to become an outdoorsy person. Now, I assume if I did all that, now yes, then my identity would change. Now, what's the drawback? Now, the drawback is that all of the stuff I put down here, especially the part with the pocket knife, now that sounds like a lot of effort and sounds like little fun. I like having my car, so to speak, and I'm not so sure about the pocket knife thing, right? So does it mean that I will have to give up that tremendous, wonderful idea of becoming an outdoorsy person? Well, no, not necessarily, right? Because luckily for me, there's lots of brands out there in the marketplace that will promise or render that identity possible. Say, okay, I could go out and get a Mammoth jacket, I could go and get out a North Face backpack, and I could also start wearing some Timberland boots. Now, assuming we met in person one day and you saw me for the first time, I would be wearing a Mammoth jacket, wearing a North Face backpack, or wearing some Timberland boots. Now, what would you think? Now, you would probably think, to a certain degree at least, well, here's the outdoorsy guy wearing all that outdoorsy stuff. Now, that's fantastic, right? Because it means I can choose or construct an identity through certain symbols that are out there in the marketplace, the brands. Now, I can allow that for building my own identity, and all I need to do in return is to give up my money. So assuming I can afford it, now brands are a very comfortable way of building your own identity, of building your own personality. Now let's go on talking a bit about this issue of identity construction, identity expression. Now what I have here is a study which I find particularly interesting, and what they look at is they look at the size of logos. Now this whole idea about identity construction is based on the assumption that you use a brand, you buy a brand, and other people out there will recognize a brand and know what it stands for, right? So you choose Adidas or Apple as a brand, now because you like them, and then you assume that your friends, relatives, and all the people out there, they will have a similar idea about the Adidas and the Apple brand and understand what you're trying to do. Now the question, so brands need to be recognized. Now the question is, how I mean, how massive or how easily should the brand be recognized? Now, for instance, I have an example here. Now, let's assume the guys out there, you need a new tie, say, for a job interview. And you have two different ties you could choose from, both luxury ties. One of them is Burberry, and the other one is Hermes. Now, they both come around the price tag about 160 euros, which I assume is a lot of money for a tie. Now, but if you look at these two ties, they're also different in another sense. In this case, the Burberry one, now this can be recognized very easily as a Burberry tie because there's classical check patterns. Whether this tie here from Hermes, well, this is kind of a run-of-the-mill tie. So I suppose the material is fantastic, but it looks like many other ties in the marketplace. Now, so which one is better? So which one would be more attractive or more appealing to customers? Now, so this is what these two people here, Berger and Ward, looked at in the study. So how big is the logo of certain branded goods? How easily can they be recognized? And how does that relate to price? Now, so what they did in the study is they went online and started researching lots and lots of prices of sunglasses, right? Now, that's one thing they did, and once they had collected the prices, had that database containing all the prices, now the second thing they looked at is, now how big is the logo on the sunglasses? Now, and what they did then, they had some kind of distribution, so depending on the price, that's this axis here, the price of sunglasses, and this axis here is the prevalence or the size of the brand logo. And they would start looking at, so what's the functional relationship between these two factors? Now, the bars are the empirically observed values, so what they try to do then is put a regression function through the data, and what they found, a function that fit the data very well, is some kind of inverted U-shaped relationship. Now, so what does that mean? So as sunglasses start increasing in price, say go from 100 to 200 or from 200 to 300, so to speak. Now in the beginning, the more expensive the glasses are, the more prevalent the logo will be. Now this goes up to a certain point now, and once sunglasses go beyond that point in terms of price, say from 200 to 300 or 300 to 400, even more, well, interestingly, then the presence of the logo, the size of the logo starts dropping. Now the question is, why does this happen? And the explanation is actually quite simple and intuitive. Now what they say, so they assume that we use sunglasses, always buy sunglasses to communicate who we are, right? So there's always a branding effect. Now what they say is, if you are a mere mortal, so people like me, for instance, or maybe you, now if you spend a maximum of, say, $200 or $300 even on sunglasses, now if you spend all that money, now in this case, you want people to notice. You want everybody to understand that you have just bought these expensive sunglasses. Now, but what happens in the upper price limits? Now, if you're the kind of person who can afford, and I know I'm not, but if you can afford sunglasses, say, for $600, now, it doesn't really matter, right? It doesn't really matter if all the other people on the street recognize your sunglasses, right? Now, this is not important anymore. Now, what is important is that these sunglasses are recognized in the inner circles, are recognized among your peers, among all the people who can also afford to pay that much money for sunglasses. Well, and they say, well, in that case, the logo is not so important anymore, the size of the logo, because these people will recognize and realize anyway, right? So the size of the logo becomes less important because in that price range, you don't need to be recognized on such a broad basis as, compared to when you buy cheaper sunglasses. And this will explain this curvilinear relationship. So again, I think a fascinating area of research to understand why people will buy brands and what they stand to gain from spending all that money. So after talking about the consumer perspective, I want to briefly talk about the company perspective, considering the fact that we already did that to a certain degree in the beginning of the module. So why do companies care about brands? Now, this is because once they have a brand, they incur many advantages. So probably the biggest one being differentiation, right? So strong brands allow companies to differentiate the offerings in the marketplace. Where you only had brown sugary water in the beginning, now you put a brand such as a Coca-Cola or Pepsi on the can, well, you have something else now. Now, this hopefully will also lead to greater consumer loyalty. So assuming that people care about brands, now assuming they have the money, now this will also lead to them being more loyal towards the company owning and offering the brand. Now, again, related to that is the idea of competition. Now, if you have a strong brand, that's kind of a buffer or a defense against competition, right? So people like Apple and iPhones, I do, for example, and when it comes to buying a new smartphone, well, will I fall for Samsung? I don't know. I mean, hopefully I can, as long as I can afford the iPhones, I'd rather have an iPhone than a Samsung, and this is probably also because I like the brand. Now, in terms of price, now all this doesn't come for free, all the fantastic brands you want to buy, and this means you want to buy the brand, now you will have to pay a price premium. And the idea of platform, this is something we'll talk about afterwards, is now a strong brand is not only valuable for the product you're using it for at the very moment, but also because it provides a platform. It provides a platform for companies to launch other products, and which hopefully will be associated with a greater level of success. And going through all these functions, now you can explain why companies would be so interested in building brands and investing all the money that's necessary for doing so.